Now that progressive ideas are clearly taking over the Democratic Party, there has been a dramatic shift in the way that MSNBC, or at least AM Joy, covers progressive candidates. So I have 8 clips to break down here. Now, if you know anything about Joy Reid and how she has normally discussed progressive issues, you know that she has a history of pushing back on progressive policy and acting like the moderate center is the way to go. But there is a clear difference in the way that Andrew Gillum's win is being perceived here on AM Joy, and I'm going to break that down. So first, let's get to Joy's intro, where she sort of lays out this renewed outlook.
Andrew Gillum is actually doing something interesting in Florida that completely defies the Democrats at war narrative. He's running as an unabashed progressive on a lot of issues that Sanders fans love, but also as a pragmatist who's able to speak to voters across traditional ideological lines, which is why he has, whatever they might tell you, Florida Republicans nervous.
Okay, this short little intro is really a good summation of everything that is going to be discussed here in this segment, because what Joy Reid does here is correctly point out that Andrew Gillum is progressive on the policy, but then she makes it sound like he's also pragmatic. Now, Andrew Gillum's message isn't really any different than Bernie's message is. What's different here is the way that MSNBC is looking at that messaging. So whereas they used to think of Bernie Sanders and that sort of progressive policy as far to the left, they are now looking at progressive candidates as pragmatic. So let's go to the next clip, where another prominent Hillary supporter, Eric Bullard, also appears to have this transformation.
What's happening in the Democratic Party now does not. There is no civil war. I think the press was hoping for one, and it's being portrayed as a negative. Right, a couple of weeks ago, in the New York Times front page story, the premise was basically there's too much passion and energy in the Democratic base, and that's going to hurt them in November. Yeah. I guarantee, if you go back to 2010, the Tea Party movement was not depicted as a problem for the Republican Party. It was depicted as a godsend, a grassroots movement, and we're seeing many grassroots movements coming together in the Democratic Party right now.
And it's important. It's interesting that you say that, because the other thing that was interesting about the Tea Party is that the media became obsessed with them and wanted to interview them and talk to them. I haven't seen anybody actually go out and do these in-depth deep dives on these progressive voters to ask them why are they voting for these candidates, because you have Beto O'Rourke also doing really well in Texas as a progressive candidate. There is something interesting happening in the base of the independent and Dem-leaning independent and Democratic base that we're not talking about.
What happened to Joy Reid? She's a completely different person. Now, you're going to see some regression kind of in clips coming up, but this is an obvious progressive message, talking about how the Tea Party got all the attention when they were starting to win races in 2010, but how progressive voters are being completely ignored. So while the media was so focused on what Tea Party voters, what they were into, the attention on progressive voters has been almost nothing. Now, Joy Reid points that out here, as does Eric Bullard. So these are two very prominent Hillary supporters in the 2016 primaries, talking about how the progressive message is too far left. And now they're acting like this message is pragmatic. And of course, these progressive candidates are winning because that's what voters want. But this is the narrative they fought back against the whole time. Now, look, I don't want to seem like I'm, talking shit on Joy Reid and Eric Bullard here, because ultimately this is what I want them to do. This is exactly what I want them to do. I want them to embrace the progressive message, progressive policy, and they are doing that. But I just find it funny that they are doing it in this way where they're acting like they were never wrong. Oh, yeah, of course progressives are winning. Yeah, that is just a pragmatic thing to do. That's the way to go. That's where the base is. That's where all the grassroots organizing is. Of course you should go in the progressive direction. It's pretty funny. But apart from the hilarity of that, they're making good points. And progressive voters should be getting attention from the mainstream press. Now let's get to the third clip, where there's a couple good aspects of this that I want to touch on.
This is a woman named Mimi, and she's interviewed and asked why she voted for Andrew Gillum. Take a listen.
I love progressives. I'm so tired of the old way. Even I'm a registered Democrat, but I've voted for people who are a little more moderate in the past. But now I think we need to go progressive and get rid of some of these old ideas.
And, Bill, that is kind of the interesting thing, right? That progressive ideas are always portrayed as so outre. But for a lot of voters, they're just kind of tired of is it that voters are kind of tired of what the Democratic Party has been presenting, which is here's a safe candidate who's non-threatening, rather than what Gillum is doing, which is, no, these are my ideas.
Absolutely. Every time I see this narrative of this civil war in the Democratic Party, it drives me bonkers. I mean, if there's any civil war, it's in the Republican Party. We saw that in full display at the National Cathedral yesterday. But I think this woman is onto something. Look at Andrew Gillum. Look at Stacey Abrams in Georgia. Look at Beto O'Rourke in Texas. Look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Queens. Look at Ben Jealous in Maryland. Something is going on. And it's not... Eric's absolutely right. This is no longer the Hillary versus Bernie thing. I mean, at the DNC meeting last week, almost all the Hillary people and almost all the Bernie people voted together to get rid of the superdelegates. The party has a resurgence and a life today, particularly on the left, that I think is very, very striking. And I think what's behind this socialist pejorative that they try to attack on anybody who had Bernie Sanders' endorsement is that the Republicans are running scared. They see that something's happening, and I think the American people, this is a message, by the way, that Bernie Sanders had in 2016. I support him in the primary for that, and look at how well he did. People were fed up with the Democratic Party as usual. You couldn't tell the difference in too many cases between the Republican and the Democratic Party, and now that's changing. That's changing fast, and I think it's big, and it looks very positive for this November.
All right, so a lot of great stuff there. That first clip with Mimi, who the voter that I guess was a moderate Democratic voter is now a progressive voter, that is the kind of clip you would not normally see MSNBC run. But now here they are acknowledging that even moderate voters are now turning to progressive candidates. This is a major shift. So, look, throughout this whole segment, they're trying to act like they were never wrong about these issues, but whatever. We all know they were. But the real thing now, what matters now, is that they are coming around and they are covering this properly. So, you see, Joy Reid mentioned there how progressive ideas used to be so outre, which means unconventional, but they aren't, in fact, outre. They are moderate. They're standard. Everyone agrees on them. Most Americans agree on healthcare, on higher wages, on getting money out of politics, all these issues that these progressive candidates are running on. So while Joy Reid was one of those people that used to say that progressive policy was outre, she's now acknowledging that they, in fact, are not. So this is real progress here. Now, we have Bill Press, who has actually been a long time progressive, a Bernie supporter in 2016. He breaks down how there is no civil war in the Democratic Party. Now, a few other people on this panel mentioned that. The reality is there was a civil war, and the moderates lost that civil war when Hillary Clinton lost the election. That proved that being a so-called moderate, a Democratic moderate, a centrist, was not the way to win elections. That should have been the end of the Civil War there. Unfortunately, a lot of this bullshit narrative lasted up till now, but we are now seeing a real shift in the way that this narrative is covered. So, yes, there was a Civil War, but the reality is progressives have won that Civil War. The war is over. So, if you don't want to acknowledge that, that's fine. Now, Bill Press, I'm not going to, criticize him for not saying this, but the others like Eric Bullard who have lost this war, who have lost this Civil War, he, like all of them, like Joy Reid, like Jonathan Capehart, these were people that were pushing back against progressive policy for the past 4 or 5 years. And if they don't want to acknowledge that, they don't want to acknowledge they were wrong to do that, fine. But understand that's where they were. They are now late to the party. But regardless, they have come around, and this is real progress. Now, let's get to the fourth clip here, where there's just more enjoyment.
And Jonathan, you and I have talked about this before. One of the things that it has been true for probably 20, 30 years is that after 1972, after the McGovern candidacy, there has been a narrative that if progressivism is rising in the Democratic Party, it is a threat to the Democratic Party, and that the only way Democrats can win is the way Bill Clinton did, by essentially becoming more centrist, more like Republicans, and if they aren't doing that, they're losing. The Nation came out with an article, a headline that is interesting to me because of that, and it says, Andrew Gillum's win is great news for all the Democrats, despite what the media may tell you. I mean, what? I mean, it is interesting to me that you have to sort of convince people that no, it's a good thing that this progressive black guy is the nominee.
Again, what is going on here? This is an entirely new MSNBC, an entirely new Joy Reid. Here she is saying, talking about the narrative since 1972, that the only way that Democrats can win is by being more moderate, more centrist, and that progressives are a threat to the Democratic Party. You know who was pushing that message out there? MSNBC, Joy Reid, Jonathan Capehart. These people, Eric Bollard, these people that are on Joy Reid's show were the ones pushing that message out there. And now they're acting like that's a hilarious notion. Oh, of course, to win, you must be a progressive. Where were you 2 years ago? Hell, where were you a month ago? I mean, this is an entirely new way that MSNBC is now covering these progressive races. So, you know what? This is good. Again, this is good. So we can laugh and talk about how ridiculous this is, because it is ridiculous that they're not acknowledging their complete 180 on this. But ultimately, this is exactly what we need mainstream press to do. We need the mainstream press to push out these progressive candidates as if they are moderate, because they are moderate. So again, on the issues, Medicare for all, living wage, getting money out of politics, the majority of Americans support these issues. So they are moderate on the policies. But the way that MSNBC and Joy Reid and the entire network has treated these progressive candidates is that they are too far left, too crazy. But this is finally really the first acknowledgement that these progressive ideas are not crazy, and they are, in fact, moderate or pragmatic. Now, next clip. I got 3 more clips because this segment was really too good. This one is Jonathan Capehart mentioning an incredible point that Gillum made when he interviewed him.
And when I interviewed Andrew Gillum back in June for my podcast at the Washington Post, I asked him, well, what makes you think you're going to win in Florida to become the governor? And he talked about how he is going to get those forgotten voters, the forgotten people of the Democratic Party who have long stopped voting, to vote for him. And he said, my opinion as to why we've been losing in Florida, Democrats, is that we keep running these races as if we are running Republican light. What Republican voters have shown us is that when they have the choice between the real thing and the fake one, they go with the real one every time. And then our voters, the very ones that we need in order to win, we're not providing them a motivation or a stimulation to get out there and vote for us. Why? Because they're not sure that we're for them. That, to me, crystallizes the power of Andrew Gillum's candidacy and the power of his message, and why so many people are open to hearing him and who actually went out and voted for him.
Yeah.
This is incredible. So just a short little background. Jonathan Capehart is one of the few people I know of that has blocked me on Twitter. And he blocked me on Twitter over a tongue-in-cheek comment that I made when he wrote an article about the Elizabeth Warren versus Bernie Sanders supporters trying to create this sort of divide between progressives. This was, I think, 2 years ago. Anyways, I made some tongue-in-cheek remark, tweeted about that, and he blocked me. But the point is, he has been somebody that has been pushing this bullshit narrative forward, talking about how the only way forward for Democrats is to be corporate, or maybe that isn't the words he would use, but to be moderate, to be centrist. And now here he is, saying the same thing that I and many other progressives have been saying online for years, and that's you can't expect a Republican light Democrat to win against a real Republican. You need the Democratic candidate to actually be different, to actually speak for people. And the way they do that is by speaking to the actual issues that people vote on, that people care about. All Capehart is saying here, in terms of him quoting Gillum, is exactly what all of us have been saying for years, and we were all ignored. We were all sidelined. We were all treated like our progressive ideas were crazy, and there's no way that progressives can win. But now here they are embracing the exact talking points, the exact, almost word for word, the exact things we have been saying for the past 2 years, at least the past 2 years. So again, this is a step in the right direction, but just to see these words come out of the mouth of someone like Jonathan Capehart and Joy Reid and Eric Boehlert, to me, is hilarious. Now, let's get to clip number 6 here, where Michelle Bernard brings up, I think, some other good points.
You know, what's so interesting about Gillum is, and this whole notion of, whether he's a Bernie Sanders person or a Hillary Clinton person, the country has changed. So the Republican Party has changed. The Democratic Party has to change. We saw the evolution of the blue dog Democrat when Bill Clinton was president. Yep. Well, now we're seeing the evolution of a new type of Democrat. We're seeing it in Florida. We're seeing it in Georgia. And I have to say, Joy, when you have someone who's running for governor use the term monkeying around right after we have news reports about police officers being found in the state of Florida to tell other cops to blame crimes on black people, you have to know that you're going to encourage the black vote to come out. We've got a new type of black Democrat. We've got a new type of America. We've got a new Democratic Party. And I think we're seeing it in Florida and in Georgia.
All right, so this was also great. This is really the first time that I have seen acknowledged in mainstream press that there is a new type of Democratic voter. That Democratic voters aren't looking for a centrist or a moderate, but they are in fact looking for a progressive candidate like an Andrew Gillum. This is the first time I've seen this acknowledged in mainstream press. So this is a real shift in the right direction. Now, it remains to be seen if other networks and publications adopt this sort of view, but at least some are waking up. And the importance of this is that the kind of viewer that watches MSNBC on a regular basis, they often don't watch YouTube or don't read progressive publications and don't have that other viewpoint. But now that they maybe watch Joy Reid and they see this view coming out there and recognizing that, yeah, people are progressive. I am progressive on these issues. I do want a progressive candidate. It can slowly change the narrative for the type of viewer that watches MSNBC. Now, the other half of this that I think is also incredibly important is just this real acknowledgement now, or this awareness that the GOP really is just about naked white identity politics. So Gillum's opponent, DeSantis in Florida, he's just openly embracing racist dog whistles. And whereas before the Republican Party always had that in the party, it wasn't as open and obvious as it is now, or at the very least wasn't as accepted by the conservative base, or at least conservative media, as it is now. So there really is this clear divide, not just on economic policy between Democrats, progressive Democrats, and Republicans, but now there's also this very clear divide on cultural issues between Democrats and Republicans. So while Republicans think that's their strength, it's only their strength if the Democratic vote is suppressed, like it was in 2016. But if you have a progressive like Gillum running against someone like DeSantis, a Trump-supporting GOP candidate, this cultural language, this dog whistling is not going to help DeSantis. Yes, it may get him the Trump votes, but with Gillum out there getting the progressive vote and the most importantly, the non-voter out to vote for him because he's talking to issues like wages, like healthcare, Gillum has the edge here. And I don't think Trump-supporting GOP candidates like DeSantis get that yet. Now, let's go on to the next clip, which has some very interesting Dana bashing.
You're now in a general election in a state that Trump won. You ran pretty far to the left in the primary race. In order to be governor, you need to win voters in the middle. How are you going to do that?
I don't believe that any of the issues that I stood on in the primary are in any way disqualifying in this general election.
You know, Bill Press, I feel like that narrative presupposes that things like a decent minimum wage. I mean, Florida is a low tax, lower wage state. The idea of health care, where people are freaking out because they didn't realize that their health health care was Obamacare, and then it's being taken away from them. But that these issues are being framed as too far to the left to win in a general election. Is that a mistake on the part of sort of the media narrative?
But no, I mean, look, I love Dino too, but that's ridiculous. But she's not the only one. This is a meme that's been taken up by the media, and it's nuts. I looked at Andrew Gillum's agenda. What was his agenda? Medicare for all. I mean, Medicare's been around for, what, 60, 70 years? It's hardly a radical socialist idea. $15 minimum wage. Really? That's a socialist idea? They put this label on him as if to demean him and say he's so far to the left that he can't win. I dare say that I think Medicare for all is a winning issue, especially in Florida.
All right. Now we have MSNBC openly criticizing how CNN covers progressive candidates. The only downside here is that I may be out of a job if they keep doing this, because this is exactly what I've been doing for the past several years. So this is, again, this false narrative that CNN and usually MSNBC have when covering progressive candidates is, well, don't they need to go to the center to win? No, there is no center. Again, the center is millionaires. The center are the people on television, are the hosts on television, are the Beltway media. Everybody else in the country are not in what they would view as the center. The center, the actual center of the country, is people that support Medicare for all, because the majority of Americans support Medicare for all. People that want to get money out of politics. The majority of Americans want to get money out of politics. People that support higher wages. The majority of Americans support higher wages. That's the center. So a lot of the media would call that far left, but that's not far left. That's the center. So again, you have CNN with the old narrative pushing Andrew Gillum on shouldn't he be in the center, but the actual message here is that Andrew Gillum is going after non-voters, people that don't normally vote. And the way you do that is by talking to the issues that will actually affect their lives, be it wages or healthcare. So we have MSNBC, of all places, recognizing that false narrative and pointing it out. Again, this is real progress. Now, let's get to the last clip here, which, again, blows my mind. And it's Jonathan Capehart talking about the minimum wage.
Oh, so Joy, I want to jump off something that Bill was just talking about in terms of how radical raising the minimum wage is.
Yeah.
In 2016, in Arizona, there was a ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage to $12 an hour. Arizona, red state, Donald Trump won it by 49%. The ballot initiative also won that same day by 58%. The ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage in Arizona got more votes than Donald Trump.
Yeah, and in this election coming up, is there a narrative that says that progressives are now feeling, you know what, we can win,
right,
and so these candidates are more viable because of progressivism, or is it that these ideas are actually a lot more mainstream than people think?
They're very mainstream. I mean, you look at the polling where Gillum is on common sense gun laws, and you look where DeSantis is.
Yeah.
Look where DeSantis is on building a wall. Look where DeSantis is on repealing Obamacare. Those are wildly unpopular positions. When DeSantis is interviewed, he's not asked, boy, you ran so far to the right. You're a Trump radical acolyte. How are you going to possibly appeal to those Florida voters? Why is it only the Democrat who has to explain his position, which is a very mainstream popular position?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. This is the perfect cherry on top for this entire segment. These points are, again, the points that I've been making, that other progressives have been making for years. And now we are finally seeing that message adopted in mainstream press. So ideas like, well, first, Jonathan Capehart and the minimum wage. He makes a fantastic point here. The minimum wage, raising the minimum wage, got more support in Arizona than Donald Trump did. Now, what does that tell you? That tells me that Democrats lost in 2016 because they weren't speaking on economic issues. Trump at least spoke for something. So what Democrats did in 2016 was suppress the vote because they weren't speaking enough to these issues that actually matter to voters. They lost to Trump because Trump actually spoke for something. So while Democrats were suppressing the vote in their lack of coverage of these real issues, Trump actually spoke to the base of his party and got them to come out to vote for him. So, again, this is MSNBC the way that they should be. This is actual coverage speaking to actual issues in reality, in facts. And Bullard here at the end makes another great point. Why do only progressives have to explain their positions? Why don't conservatives ever have to explain their positions? Again, this is exactly right. This is everything that I have been saying forever. Progressives always have to do this extra explaining, like Andrew Gillum did with Dana Bash. Always have to try and defend their positions, but Republicans don't. It's because of this narrative in Washington, in mainstream press normally, this narrative that the country is center right, but they're not. I broke this down in a recent video. Even though people self-identify as moderate to conservative, when it comes to the actual polling on the issues, people poll progressive. The reason for that is because people don't know what moderate, liberal, or conservative means. It means different things to different people. So while somebody may poll as saying that they are conservative, that same person that says they are conservative are very likely to actually support Medicare for all. So you have to look at polling on the actual policy issues, not on how people self-identify, because people attach different meanings to different words. So again, for years there's been this false narrative that America's center-right. They are not. Look at the actual polling on the policy positions, and maybe for once, that is what MSNBC, or at least AM Joy and her panel here, has done. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button below and consider becoming a patron at therationalnational.com/join. You get some extra content, but also, most importantly, you help support me in continuing to produce these sorts of videos.